All right, so we're going to move on with Mark's gospel on making Jesus angry, right? And the question this week, what makes Jesus angry? It depends who you ask, right? What makes Jesus angry? It's all you nasty sinners. It's California, right? That's why you keep having those earthquakes and wildfires, because Jesus is angry at you. What is it that actually makes Jesus angry? And in this passage, we're going to find out. By the way, let me apologize for my voice. I have really severe allergies right now, so I have this really bad postnasal drip, which is killing my voice. So I apologize for that. But what is it that makes Jesus angry? We're going to find out in Mark chapter 3, verses 1 through 6 here. All right. So again, we've been talking about conflict stories. In chapter 2, we had 4 conflict stories. And in chapter 3, verses 1 through 6, this is the final conflict story of Jesus' early Galilean ministry. So this is the final conflict that he's going to come into, and the conflict between him and the religious leaders is going to come to its absolute boiling point. So let me just interrupt for a second. Let me get a Kleenex. My allergies are really bad. Sorry about that, guys. Thank you. I'm going to move those up there with me in case I need them. Maybe I just got all sentimental talking about mom. I don't know. I'm taking my mom to brunch afterwards, so we're having a good time. All right. Are we ready? All right, let's pick this back up again. Mark chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. It's our final conflict story that we have here. Let's take a look at the passage. Jesus is going to heal a man on the Sabbath. And you're probably thinking to yourself, well, what's so bad about that? How can somebody get angry about that? What's going on there? But let's take a look at the passage and see what happened. Again, he entered the synagogue, and a man was there who had a withered hand. They watched him to see whether he would cure him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. Can you imagine that? They're hanging out in church, right? They're hanging out in the temple so they can find some way to accuse Jesus. And he said to the man who had the withered hand, "Come forward." Then he said to them, "Is it lawful to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath, to save a life or to kill?" And notice, but they were silent. And he looked around at them with anger. Right here. You want to know what makes Jesus angry? What's happening in this passage is what makes him angry. Jesus looks at them with anger. He was grieved at the hardness of heart and said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." And he stretched it out, and his hand was restored. And the Pharisees went out immediately and conspired with the Herodians against him, how to destroy him. So this is the final conflict story in his early Galilean ministry. And the Pharisees have completely turned against him, and they're now seeking to destroy him. Jesus and his disciples, I do want to note this, they often went to the synagogue to pray and worship. They would go, they would pray, they would worship, and they would do what everybody else did. Not only would they pray and worship, but they would discuss Torah. They would discuss different ideas, and oftentimes Jesus, being itinerant rabbi, would teach. And so he was being watched quite closely by a lot of people, but he was being watched by the Pharisees so they could accuse him. Not just can we evaluate what he says, can we discuss what he says? Okay, Jesus is teaching this. Okay, well, let's interact with him. Don't you think it's this way instead? No, instead they're watching for a way to accuse him. They have already decided in their hearts that this person is a blasphemer, that this person is a heretic, that this person needs to be destroyed. They've already decided that, and they're looking for ways to destroy him. And I think this really kind of goes to the attitude of the Pharisees. Here you are sitting in synagogue where you're supposed to be praying and you're supposed to be worshiping, and what are you doing? You're looking for somebody, some way to accuse and destroy another human being. Not that would ever happen in church. Not that anybody would ever show up to church and look around and go, "I wonder how I could slander that person over there." Right? We know that you're all focused. So we're good. The Pharisees opposed Jesus because he didn't follow their view of the law. Now remember, the Pharisees believed that if everybody would just keep all the Old Testament laws for one day, the Messiah would appear. And the fact that the Messiah had not appeared was because of all you nasty sinners who weren't following the law. And so they put in a lot of detail in their oral traditions about here's how you follow the law. Here's what you need to do. You want to avoid work? Follow all these rules. And Jesus didn't agree. Jesus didn't follow their oral tradition. These oral traditions that had raised them to a place of prominence, their interpretation of the law had made them sort of infamous, famous, and people looked up to them and thought, well, these are very pious people. These are good people. These are wise people. These are smart people. We need to look up to them and respect them. And yet Jesus was not following them like everybody else did. Sabbath observance was an important element in Jewish observance and a major distinction between Jew and Gentile. So the Pharisees took Sabbath observance very, very seriously. Because they're like, this is the major distinction between us and the Gentiles. And we need to make sure that we follow every rule about Sabbath observance. And this working stuff, oh, yeah, we better not do that. If you were here last week, I was talking about the book Word Freak and about all the rules about even playing Scrabble on the Sabbath and the things that go with that. But they take it very, very seriously. So here's this man with a withered hand. And what exactly what was wrong with it, we don't know. A lot of people assume that was some kind of palsy, most likely. Could have been something like cerebral palsy. We don't know what it was. But he had a hand that did not function. And rather than worship in the house of God, the Pharisees were lying in wait for Jesus to find a way to accuse him. And they see this man with a withered hand, not as somebody who needs compassion, but as a way to lay a trap. Does anybody see a problem with that? That here's a fellow human being who needs compassion, and instead we're going to use him to trap Jesus. Rather than offering charity to this man with a withered hand, the Pharisees decide to use him as a trap. Healing was work. If Jesus healed this man, he'd be working on the Sabbath, and then we can accuse him. And then we can make him look bad in front of everybody else. However, if this person's life was in danger, you can heal then. See, healing's a no-no. No work was permitted on the Sabbath. But if the person's life is in danger, well, then go ahead, you can heal them. You have our permission. But a withered hand is not putting this man's life in danger. So they're waiting. Is he going to heal him? What's he going to do? Let's find a way to trap him. Jesus knows what's going on. Jesus knows what's in their hearts. And he asks a question. Is it lawful to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath, to save life or to kill? Now, most of us would read this question and go, well, it makes sense to me. Is it lawful to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath? Well, obviously it's lawful to do good. Shouldn't you do good things on the Sabbath? I mean, this is this day that's set aside to be holy. Shouldn't you do good? Is it lawful to save life or to kill? Well, obviously the answer is to save life. It wouldn't be it'd be even worse to kill on the Sabbath, wouldn't it? This is just like holy day. But Jesus is making a point beyond all of this. He's saying, you don't understand the Sabbath. He'd already corrected their thinking about the Sabbath, that the Sabbath was not made for man was not made for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath was made for man. The Sabbath was a gift and a blessing to mankind. And you've turned it into a day of duty and work and drudgery. And he's saying, you know what? You're still missing the point. On the Sabbath, it's not just enough to avoid doing all this stuff. You should be actively going out and doing good stuff. This is a holy day. It's not just about avoiding what you think is sin. It's about actively going out there and doing good stuff. We should be blessing people on this day. And you're preventing that because of your rules. So again, Jesus is refocusing the purpose of the Sabbath. Why are we doing this? What is the Sabbath really for? Jesus changes the Sabbath from a religious duty with a list of things to avoid into a higher principle of actively doing good. This higher principle of actively doing good. And it heeds back to the Old Testament prophets. If you look at the Old Testament prophet Jeremiah, he condemned the children of Israel. He says, you've turned the Sabbath into, you show up, you sing the songs, You say the prayers, and then you walk away thinking you've done your duty. And yet there are people who are hungry. There are people who are in need, and you do nothing for them. God is not looking for you to show up and perform a religious duty. He doesn't want you just to show up and read a few scripture verses and sing a few songs. You know what's better worship than that? You go out and you take care of somebody who's in need. That's what he really wants. And this is what Jesus is pointing out. It's not about you just showing up and avoiding doing bad things. It's not about on Sunday you give your language a little spiritual rest, to quote Amy Grant for Cedric back there. It's about actively going out and doing good and blessing people on this wonderful holy day. No one would claim that it's lawful or right to do evil or kill on the Sabbath. That wouldn't make any sense. The obvious alternative is that it must be right to do good and to save lives. It must be right to go out and do good things. How could anybody say that's not right? If I see my neighbor and he's in need, how could anybody say that my carrying a box of groceries over to him is work and condemn me because I did it on the Sabbath? It must be okay to do good things on the Sabbath, this beautiful, blessed gift from God. To heal is to do good. To do nothing is to do evil. Oh, I'd like to help you, but we're just going to have to wait till Saturday at sundown. I realize, you really need I know you're hungry, but, I'll see you after sundown on Saturday. To heal is to save a life. Not to heal is the equivalent of killing. Jesus literally makes it this serious. He makes this parallel comment. By avoiding all the good things you should be doing, by making excuses and finding ways to avoid doing the good things, you're just the same as a murderer. It's the same stuff. It's because it's this relationship between you and other people. The Pharisees remain silent. They can't answer his question, and they don't answer the question. They're like, oh, look at that. Synagogue service is over. Wonder what's for brunch. Either position they would have taken in this point would undermine their interpretation of the law. They had come to the synagogue seeking a way to trap Jesus, and Jesus reverses it. Congratulations, here's a little trap for you. You want to play these games? Here, answer this one. And they suddenly realize there's a major flaw in their thinking, and they don't want to have to admit it. I'm sure none of you have ever run into a person who cannot admit when they're wrong. But these are the people here. They're like, oh, we can't admit this. It's going to make us look politically bad. We're going to lose some respect. People are going to look down on us. He looked around at them with anger. What makes Jesus angry? What these guys are doing. This is what makes Jesus angry. He looked around at them with anger. He was grieved at the hardness of their heart. Jesus is angered by the hardness of their heart. Their hearts had turned to stone. They didn't care about the needs of other people. They didn't care about having a right relationship with their neighbor. You know what they cared about? Keeping rules. They cared about keeping rules. Again, going back to the prophet Jeremiah, in chapter 17, it talks about how hard the hearts of Israel had become, and that their sins had literally been carved into their stone hearts with flint. And that's kind of this connection to the Old Testament, 10 Commandments, that the 10 Commandments were carved on stone with flint. And that their sins had become so engraved in their hearts, that their sins had become so much part of them, of these hard hearts that they had, that they're so busy following law, they forget about love and grace. They forget about righteousness. They forget about mercy and compassion because our hearts are hard. And this is what's happened to the Pharisees. They're so concerned with the law and keeping the law that their hearts have become hard. And this angers Jesus. This is what makes Jesus angry. It's not California. It's not drag queens. It's hardness of heart. This is what makes Jesus angry. Jesus is angered by turning a time of prayer and worship into a trap. You know what really makes Jesus angry? It's the people who disrupt and destroy churches and make them split over their own particular political gains, over wanting positions and power, wanting prestige and respect. They want to run the church. They want to be in charge. And so they start whispering campaigns and gossiping campaigns. And they fight against each other within the church. That's what makes Jesus angry. And Paul says the same thing. Right? Paul says the same thing about the divisive people within the church. How angry that makes God. Jesus is angered by using a man who should be shown compassion, and yet he's turned into a trap. You should be helping this guy out. This man with a withered hand, this is a man who needs help. He can't work because of his withered hand. And you should be showing him compassion and charity and mercy, and you should be helping him in some way. And what are you doing? You're sitting him down and you're using him as a trap to hurt other people. You're trying to harm me. It's more important to you that you show up at the synagogue in the morning so you can harm me rather than help him. I'm angry. This is what makes Jesus angry. This is what makes Jesus angry. It's not R-rated movies. It's not that TV show that they're all, yelling about. It's this hardness of heart that makes Jesus angry. Jesus is angered by the hardness of theological correctness over compassion, where I've got to follow my theological rules, where I've got to follow the law and the traditions put down by my church rather than compassion. Again, this is why I send out that warning to evangelicals. Your hardness of heart is showing. And if you continue to make mothers choose between their children and their church, those beautiful, beautiful women with those beautiful soft hearts are going to choose their children every time. And we're recognizing your hardness of heart, evangelicals. Wake up. You're the modern day Pharisees of our time. Jesus is angered by religious rules that prevent the doing of good. What? Well, we're just loving people. Yeah? Are you using the Bible, quoting verses, finding religious rules to avoid doing good things for other people? Well, I'm just trying to show them tough love. Yeah, really? Show me chapter and verse where it says tough love. Show me chapter and verse where it says take your child and throw him to the wolves. Go ahead, you show that to me. It's nowhere in the Bible. You can't find that. There are verses in the Bible about discipline. But discipline is not throwing your child to the wolves. Discipline is about long-term, consistent, right? Support and encouragement and retraining. Not about, let's just throw him to the wolves and hope he turns out okay. Jesus is angered by these silly religious rules that prevent us from doing good. Oh, yeah, I put this picture up here for a reason. This week, we got a lot of people, they're all upset, they're yelling and screaming. Rule 42 just fell, which is having to do with the influx of migrants into our country. And can I tell you right now, let me just say this. Immigration into our country is not a simplistic issue. There is no simplistic answer. And unfortunately in politics, that's all we throw out. We throw out these convenient little memes and bumper sticker phrases, and those aren't going to solve the problem. Immigration into this country is a complex issue. And we have to really kind of look at our entire system and reevaluate what we're doing. I don't think this is the best solution that we're looking at. Because if you were sitting in that pen, that cage, that whatever you want to call it, I don't think that's the way you'd want to be treated. And we are clearly instructed to do unto others as you'd have them do unto us. I don't think this is the way, right? Maybe if we just took, all our congressmen and put them in this situation for 3 or 4 days, maybe it'd open their eyes a little bit. They had to experience what some other people are experiencing. I'm telling you, we say, and there's a lot of negativity about immigrants coming into this country. Oh, well, they're coming here illegally, this, that, something else. They're fleeing. They're fleeing drug cartels that are murdering their... it's not an easy issue. It can't be... It's very complex, people, and we need to stop thinking in simplistic terms. What makes Jesus angry? Well, how about evangelical leaders who preached against and opposed asylum seekers because they were crossing illegally? I think that there should have been compassion and mercy. These evangelical leaders should have been down there at the border trying to make conditions better. You want to stop them at the border? Okay, I get that. I understand that position. But what are you doing to make sure that they're being treated like human beings and not being treated like animals? And is the rhetoric that you're using from your pulpit treating them as second-class human beings, as less than human beings? Because if that's what you're preaching from the pulpit, you are insulting God, because each and every one of them is created within the image of God and bear the image of God. What were you doing to make their life better? See, you have religious rules that are preventing you from doing good. You don't want them to cross, I understand, but what are you doing to make their life better while they're being held in detention? Separating families. I can't believe they would do that. And they thought that was okay. Well, some of these children come across unattended. That's because you have mothers and fathers who are like, I just need to get my kids someplace safe. It's a very complex issue, people. We got to stop shouting slogans. Well, they should seek legal means, said the evangelicals. Well, when you cut off all the legal means, when you get rid of all the people who are supposed to be processing them, when you get rid of the judges, I was appalled. I was appalled that a 3-year-old child stood before a judge without an advocate. Appalled. Where were the evangelicals providing advocates then? Where were they? Nowhere. Ignoring the complexity of the problem and the great need. That's what makes Jesus angry. Ignoring the complexity of the problem and the great need. Compassion was ignored in favor of political excuses. Well, they're illegals. They're illegals. As though they're second-class human beings because of that. They're not. We need to start working together, one church, universal, under Christ, to start dealing with some of these injustices. And we got to stop making political excuses and start doing good. Oh, well, it's Charles. He's yelling at me again. They're illegals. They're breaking the law. They're illegals. Yeah, and so was Jesus when he healed on the Sabbath. Broke the law right there in front of everybody. And they accused him for it, and they decided they needed to destroy him. Jesus broke the law. Broke that religious law right there in front of everyone. Hey, stretch out your hand. I'll heal you. Everybody see that? Did you see me? I just broke your religious law. Now you're all upset with me. I understand, no problem. But you know what? Compassion overrules your little religious laws. Mercy overrules that. Why don't you soften your hearts a little bit, you bunch of hard-hearted people? The Pharisees, it says, went out immediately, and they conspired with the Herodians against him, how to destroy him. Now, this is kind of an interesting situation. If you're unfamiliar with the Herodians, because they're only mentioned, I think, twice in the New Testament. The Herodians were an interesting group. The Herodians were Jewish. And they're called Herodians because they supported the tetrarch, Herod Antipas. Now, when Jesus was born, there was Herod the Great. And he's the one who sent people out to kill the babies. When he died, his kingdom was divided among several of his sons. They became known as tetrarchs. Tetra means 4? Okay, right? How many of you played Tetris? There you go. Okay, right? So his kingdom was divided. Eventually, one of his sons would be deposed, and they'd put a different person in there. They put Pilate in there, Pontius Pilate, to replace him. But Herod Antipas was the ruler over this particular area. And he wasn't very popular. And he had a critic, by the way. Do you know who his biggest critic was? Jesus' cousin, John the Baptist, who opposed his incestuous marriage. And most likely, the Pharisees were able to get the political support of the Herodians because Jesus most likely opposed Herod Antipas' marriage as well. And so they probably went to him and said, look, we know you support Herod. We got this Jesus character over here. He doesn't, he's on the same side as his cousin John the Baptist. We need to get rid of this guy. And they went, oh yeah, we do. Isn't that interesting? That when you get religious leaders and they hop in bed with political leaders, you get destruction. I'm just saying. Hello, America. Religious leaders joined with the political leaders to kill Jesus. I think anytime you mix religion and politics, you got a bad mix. Again, my degree's in history of Christianity. And every time you get religion and politics together, and they start ruling together, it's a bad mix. Look at the Middle Ages. Look at Calvin's Geneva. Ooh, not pretty. Look at the early Puritans. Not pretty. It's always easy, my folks. Let me just say this, right? We're going to live this out, knowing what makes Jesus angry. How do we now live this out? Let me just tell you this. It's always easy to find an excuse not to do what is right. Always easy. I can find an excuse any day of the week to not do what's right. There's a hungry family down the street. They need food. Well, if I give it to them once, they're going to ask again. And I don't want to become, their meal ticket every week. I don't want to be taken advantage of. See, it's always easy to find an excuse not to do what's right. Well, I'd say something about it, but it's really not my place, and I don't want to, offend anybody. And then they're going to be all mad at me. Somebody else's responsibility. It's always easy to find an excuse not to do what's right. And when you start doing that, your heart grows a little harder every day. Until you're the kind of person that Jesus is angry at because you're not loving your neighbor. We need to acknowledge that social justice issues, and there's, we say social justice. Isn't it amazing here in the United States that that's almost become a dirty word? Oh, you're one of those social justice warriors. You're all woke. That social justice issues are complex, and easy bumper sticker slogans won't fix them. Hey, I will admit that the problem is far more complex than just me taking a box of groceries down to my neighbor. That's not going to solve the complex social justice issue problems. That's not going to solve it. But you know what? It's going to alleviate that immediate problem right then and there. At least one family's not going to go hungry that night. Soup kitchens, they're not going to solve the problem. They're temporary fixes. We need to start looking at why this kind of thing happens in this country. One of the wealthiest countries in the world. And we have kids who go to school and they're hungry. And we've turned a political issue into, hey, it's okay to have metal detectors. It's okay to let people come in and shoot these kids, but God forbid that we should give them a free meal. There's something wrong there. And we need to examine this issue and its complexity and begin to see what we can do about it. And in the meantime, somebody please. And I thank all those people who go to schools and pay off the cafeteria bills for a lot of these kids who are going hungry. Thank you to those people. Does it solve the complexity of the issue? No, but at least that kid's not going hungry that day. And God sees your beautiful, soft, compassionate, merciful heart, and He loves you for it. Because that is true worship right there. As followers of Jesus, we must always seek to do good and offer compassion. And that's not easy. Again, it requires healthy boundaries, and I'm not going to deny healthy boundaries. Boundaries are that distance where I can love you, right? There are people who will take advantage of you. That's true, but don't use that as an excuse. Some of you have been taken advantage of. Don't use that as an excuse to stop doing good. Use that as a lesson. Learn from it. Learn to set an appropriate boundary and then move on and continue to do good. But we're called to do good. We're called to compassion, not to just avoid doing what's wrong. Our Christianity is not made of not going to R-rated movies, never seeing a drag show, not drinking, not smoking, not chewing tobacco, showing up to church on Sunday and reading the Bible, right? It's not about religious duties and things to avoid. Our Christianity is to follow Christ and to do good for others and to bless others and to show compassion and to show mercy and to pour out grace upon other people as much as we possibly can. Oh dear, Mabel's mad at me about something. What is it, Mabel? Charity begins at home. Charity begins at home. You know, at the last church I was at, I had people who told me this constantly. Because they were upset, because I was always trying to send money out into the community. Let's send it, you know, these are the people who need it. Let's send it out. Not here. Let me just say this first off. Okay, Open Door Ministries, you are some of the most generous people I know, and I adore you that you send so much out into the community. I thank you for that. But at my last church, you know, sending money out into the community, trying to help outside organizations, and they're like, there's people right here in the church who have needs. I'm like, yes, that's true. We should take care of those too. Right? Charity begins at home. Yeah, but it doesn't stop there, folks. If we see a need within the church, that's what we need to take care of. Yes, let's help take care of that. But that shouldn't prevent us from doing even more good. How much good should you do? What's the limit on the amount of good you should do? I don't know. How much has God blessed you? The more that God has blessed you with, the more responsibility you have to do good. And I'm telling you right now, there are some really huge mega churches. They don't need a $36 million jet to fly their pastor around from place to place. Let him ride in coach. And maybe, you know, pay off a few, you know, lunch bills so kids can eat. Maybe open up that food pantry for their community. There are kids who need shoes. I think that $36 million would buy a lot of shoes for a lot of kids who need shoes so they can go to school. Instead of buying, these multi-million-dollar mansions, hello Catholic Church, buying multi-million-dollar mansions in Orange County to house your priest, when you got a perfectly good rectory, yeah, it looks like, my college dorm room, but why should all these priests be living in these multi-million-dollar mansions behind gated communities? I don't understand that. Why don't we just take that money and, maybe hire a bunch of tutors to teach kids after school for parents who work. These kids can catch up academically because they're falling behind, provide them some school supplies. I mean, there's so many things that we can do as a church. And some of these mega churches, I'm telling you, God has blessed you so much, and you will be held accountable for what you did with it. That's called stewardship. Can I tell you, I get kind of tired of hearing stewardship sermons aimed at the person already sitting in the pew and giving every week. I get kind of tired of hearing those. I'm like, these people are giving every week. What's the problem, right? Maybe we should be talking to the leadership of these mega churches and going, what are you doing with your stewardship? How are you giving back to the community? How are you? You've been so blessed. You need to be held accountable for it. Beware, folks. Beware of religious and political leaders who find excuses for doing good. So many of us know in our hearts what needs to be done. And yet, you'll have somebody who will help you find an excuse not to do it. It's always easy to find an excuse not to do what's right. Beware of those people. They are wolves in sheep's clothing. With that, let me close in prayer. Heavenly Father, we just come before you. First, we want to just thank you for all the moms out there who have been supportive and loving and accepting. What a blessing they are to us, and we honor them today. But Father, we also just pray that you will soften our hearts. Sometimes just our hearts begin to get hard and they grow cold, just living in the society and culture that we live in. Help us to know, Lord, that the thing that truly angers you is a hard heart that refuses to reach out in love and grace. Help us, Lord, to follow you, to follow your example, to do what is good for others, because that is the act of true worship. We just pray this in your name. Amen. Oh, well. If you have watched to the end here and if you found today's content helpful, please make sure to like this video and share it with your friends. Comment with us below. We'd love to hear your comments. It helps our community here as well as our YouTube channel. Thank you again to all 26,200 subscribers currently. We're glad that you're tuning in and watching this. We're glad that this message is getting out. So thank you so much. With that, let us close this benediction. Okay, hopefully you walked away with one takeaway today. What makes Jesus angry? A hard heart. That's what makes him angry. So let's close with this benediction. As you leave this place, may you not only avoid doing wrong, but actively seek to do good. God bless you all. Go in peace. You are dismissed.
We are one in Christ, we are one in God, we are one in unity. We are one in truth, we are one in faith, we are one eternity. Everyone is welcome here, everyone is welcome here.